Did you know that recent global outlook reports for the year 2026 have just confirmed that over 318 million people across the globe will face crisis-level hunger next year? To put that in perspective, that is more than double the numbers we saw back in 2019. And folks, we are not just talking about distant developing countries here. The severe agricultural labor crisis right here in America is already driving food costs up by 15 to 20% across the board. Simultaneously, new tariffs are adding another $1,300 to $1,600 in expenses per household annually. But here's the thing that separates those who are prepared from those who will be caught off guard. While many of my neighbors are still blissfully buying the same weekly groceries they always have, completely unaware of the coming storm, I have been quietly and methodically stockpiling 7 specific food items that the vast majority of people completely overlook. Trust me, I have spent the last 3 months deeply analyzing complex supply chain reports, speaking directly to folks on the inside of the food industry, and rigorously testing various long-term storage methods. What I discovered during this research absolutely shocked me, and honestly, once you hear the details, it should shock you too. These items are not your typical cliché prepper foods that you see advertised everywhere. These are highly strategic choices designed to keep you and your family fed and healthy while everyone else is unfortunately fighting over empty supermarket shelves. Before we dive into the specific items, let me be crystal clear about one thing. This is not about irrational hoarding or panic buying. This is about being intelligent and proactive while there is still time on the clock. The crisis projected for 2026 is not some far-off, distant threat that we can ignore. It is already starting right now, right under our noses. Food manufacturing costs are skyrocketing to unprecedented levels. Generational farmers are going bankrupt at alarming rates, and grocery stores are already struggling behind the scenes to keep shelves adequately stocked. I am not sharing this information to scare you, but because I genuinely care about your family's future stability. So please, grab a pen and paper because you will want to write these details down. And make sure you stick around until we get to number 7 on the list. That single item could literally save your life in a medical emergency, yet most people have absolutely no idea how valuable it really is. Let us start with item number 1, which might seem incredibly basic, but will blow your mind when you understand the context. Active dry yeast. Now, before you dismiss this and think yeast is just for people who enjoy baking homemade bread on weekends, you need to listen to the reality of the current supply chain. I just spoke directly with a supply chain manager at a major national grocery distributor last week, and he shared something with me that has not hit mainstream news outlets yet. Major yeast production facilities are currently operating at just 60% capacity due to the severe agricultural and processing labor shortages I mentioned earlier. Here's what most people do not realize about this humble ingredient. Yeast is not just for making bread rise. It is literally your ticket to creating fresh, digestible food when everything else in your pantry runs out. Just a single small packet of yeast can turn basic stored flour and water into nutritious loaves of bread that will feed your family for days. But here's the real kicker that makes it a top-tier survival item. Properly stored yeast can last up to 2 years or more past its printed expiration date. I learned this directly from a commercial baker in Ohio who has been quietly stockpiling massive amounts of yeast since early 2025. He showed me his specific storage method, which involves vacuum sealing the packets and storing them deep in the freezer. Most people mistakenly believe that freezing temperatures kill yeast, but that is completely wrong. Cold temperatures actually place the yeast into a state of dormancy, preserving it for much longer. And here's a massive money-saving hack that most casual preppers miss completely. Stop buying those tiny little 3-packs at the grocery store. Buy your yeast in bulk from restaurant supply stores. I am currently acquiring 1-pound containers for about $8 instead of paying $1.50 for those tiny individual packets at the regular supermarket. That is a savings of over 400%. Furthermore, yeast is versatile. You can use it to make pizza dough, rolls, and even certain fermented beverages that can provide essential probiotics when fresh foods like yogurt are completely unavailable. During the last major supply chain disruption back in 2020, yeast virtually disappeared from store shelves for nearly 4 months in many areas. Do not let that happen to you again. My neighbor Sarah actually laughed when she saw me buying 5 pounds of bulk yeast last month. Guess who came knocking on my door when she could not find a single packet at 3 different stores last week to make dinner rolls? Don't be caught unprepared like Sarah. Item number 2 is the ultimate protein powerhouse that most modern shoppers completely ignore: dried beans. Let's have a serious conversation about protein. I just finished reading a dense report from a high-level food industry executive that made my jaw drop. Agricultural labor costs have risen so dramatically that traditional protein sources like beef, chicken, and pork are rapidly becoming luxury items that average families can no longer afford daily. But here is what the big food conglomerates do not want you to know. Dried beans are still incredibly cheap, and they pack more protein per dollar spent than almost any other food source on the planet. I'm talking about staples like black beans, pinto beans, kidney beans, and chickpeas. These little nutritional bombs can literally keep you alive and maintain your muscle mass when meat becomes unaffordable or unavailable. And get this fact: properly stored dried beans have a viable shelf life of over 30 years. That is not a typo. 30 years. But here is where most people mess up when they decide to stock up. They go to the store and buy those fancy, expensive packages from the organic aisle. Listen, I have personally tested beans from bulk bins versus expensive packaged organic beans. Nutritionally, they are virtually identical. The difference is entirely in the price. Bulk beans currently cost me about $1.50 per pound, while the organic packaged ones are hitting upwards of $4.50 for the exact same amount. That is a 300% markup for packaging and marketing. Here's a storage tip that changed my life. Do not leave them in the plastic store bags. Transfer them to food-grade buckets sealed with Gamma-Seal lids. Throw in a dried bay leaf or two to deter any potential pests, and those beans will outlast your mortgage. I learned this from a food preservation expert who tested 20-year-old beans stored this way and found they were still perfectly edible and nutritious. And consider the economic angle given current inflation trends. The beans you buy today for $1.50 per pound will probably cost upwards of $3 per pound by next winter. You are literally doubling your money just by buying them early and storing them properly. Item number 3 is raw honey. Let's talk about the only food in my entire pantry that I can guarantee will outlive me, my children, and probably my grandchildren. I am talking about genuine raw honey. You might think I'm exaggerating about the shelf life, but archaeologists actually discovered sealed pots of honey in ancient Egyptian tombs that had been undisturbed for over 3,000 years. When they opened them up and tested the contents, do you know what they found? The honey was still perfectly edible. It hadn't spoiled, it hadn't fermented, and it hadn't rotted. It was just as good as the day it was harvested during the time of the pharaohs. That is the absolute definition of a forever food. But I'm not stockpiling this just because it tastes sweet in my tea. I'm acquiring it because the global honey supply is facing a near total collapse that almost nobody is talking about on the evening news. We are currently seeing a catastrophic decline in global bee populations, down nearly 30% in critical farming regions. My contact at a major national honey distribution center recently tipped me off that they are already preparing to implement strict purchase limits by late spring of next year. Why? Because global demand is currently outpacing supply by 40%, and prices have already surged 20% just since last year. When the shelves go empty in 2026, genuine honey is not just going to be expensive, it's going to be virtually non-existent. And here's why that's truly terrifying. Raw honey is not just food, it's potent natural medicine. In a true emergency scenario where the grid is down and society is unstable, you might not be able to run to the emergency room for a nasty cut finger or a severe burn. Medical researchers have confirmed time and again that raw, unprocessed honey is a powerhouse antibacterial agent. When applied topically, it produces naturally occurring hydrogen peroxide and creates a barrier against infection. Many modern hospitals are already using medical-grade honey for advanced wound care. If pharmacies close down, a jar of raw honey in your pantry pantry could quite literally save you from a life-threatening infection. But, and this is a massive caveat, you absolutely have to buy the right cup. Put down that cute little plastic squeeze bear you see at the regular grocery store. Most of that stuff is ultra-pasteurized, heavy filtered, and sometimes cut with cheap corn syrup to stretch profits. The high heat used in pasteurization destroys the delicate enzymes that give honey its medicinal power. You want the ugly stuff. You want the honey that looks cloudy and opaque. If your honey turns solid or crystallizes in the jar over time, do not throw it out. That is actually visible proof of its purity. It means the good stuff is still inside. Just gently warm the jar in some shallow water and it flows like liquid gold again. I stopped buying mine at the supermarket completely. I now go straight to the source, local beekeepers. Not only am I getting the real medicinal grade product, but I am saving a fortune by cutting out the middleman. I am currently picking up gallon containers for around $85, whereas the store charges upwards of $140 for the same amount of inferior product. In a future scenario where sugar is scarce and antibiotics are hard to find, a gallon of raw honey will be the most valuable item in your entire barter kit. Item number 4 is coconut oil. Let's talk about the one item in my stash that I consider to be the Swiss Army knife of survival foods. If you looked into my hidden pantry right now, you wouldn't see gallons of cheap inflammatory vegetable oil or canola oil. You would see row after row of glass jars filled with high-quality coconut oil. Most beginner preppers make a fatal mistake here. They stock up on gallons of cheap vegetable oil from big box stores, thinking they are set for years of cooking. But here's the nightmare scenario almost no one talks about: rancidity. Most liquid cooking oils have a stable shelf life of maybe 6 to 12 months at best before they start to oxidize and go rancid. In a long-term grid-down situation, you open that bottle of vegetable oil a year later and it smells like old paint or crayons. Eating that isn't just gross. It releases harmful free radicals into your body that wreck your immune system right when you need it the most to fight off illness. Coconut oil is completely different. It is practically a biological miracle for storage. According to deep dive research from major food preservation journals, coconut oil is unique because its fat content is comprised almost entirely of medium-chain triglycerides. Without getting too technical, this specific chemical structure makes it naturally highly resistant to oxidation. It simply does not break down easily. I have personally opened jars that I buried deep in my supplies 3 years ago, and they still smell as sweet and fresh as the day I bought them. It is virtually bulletproof against the ravages of time. But I am stocking this for reasons far beyond just cooking. In a true prolonged crisis, one of the biggest killers historically isn't starvation. It is simple infection and poor hygiene. When the water stops running and pharmacies close, minor skin issues become life-threatening situations. This is where coconut oil transforms from food into essential medicine. It contains high levels of lauric acid, which has proven powerful antifungal and antibacterial properties. Imagine this scenario. It is 2026, there are no doctors available, and your child develops a nasty skin rash, or you get a cut that starts looking angry and red, or you are suffering from trench foot because you've been working outside in wet boots. Your neighbor has nothing to help you, but you have a jar of coconut oil. You can use it as an antimicrobial solve for wounds, a cure for fungal infections like athlete's foot, or the ultimate moisturizer for cracked, bleeding skin in harsh weather. It is the only food in your pantry that doubles as a functional first aid kit. And let's not forget the utility factor. If the power grid goes down tonight, did you know you can stick a piece of cotton string into a jar of coconut oil and light it, and it burns as a safe, smoke-free candle for hours? While your neighbors are sitting in pitch blackness, you have a fuel source that gives you both light and calories. Economically, this is the smartest play you can make right now. We are currently watching the prices of seed oils like sunflower and corn oil skyrocket due to major geopolitical conflicts and massive harvest failures globally. Those prices are already up 25 to 30% in some regions. Coconut oil prices have remained relatively stable so far, but that window of opportunity is rapidly closing. As more people wake up to the health dangers of cheap seed oils, the demand for healthy, shelf-stable, saturated fats like this is going to explode. By 2026, a glass jar of organic coconut oil could easily become a luxury item that only the wealthy can afford. And speaking of glass, that is my final warning regarding this item. Do not buy this in plastic tubs for long-term storage. Plastic is porous. Here is what most modern people do not understand. Sea salt is not just a seasoning to make food taste better. It is literally life insurance in crystal form. Your body constantly loses sodium through sweat, stress responses, and basic metabolic processes. Without replacing that essential sodium, your nervous system begins to shut down, your muscles stop working correctly, you get severe cramping, and eventually you die. It is that simple biology. But here's the mind-blowing part about salt as a prep. Pure sea salt never expires, ever. Scientists have successfully tested salt found in ancient Egyptian tombs that is over 4,000 years old, and it is still perfectly usable today. We are talking about a food item that outlasts entire civilizations. Now here is where the current situation gets scary regarding supply. I recently spoke with a guy who manages regional distribution for one of the largest salt companies in America. He told me something alarming that has not hit the news yet. Salt production facilities are struggling hard with the same labor shortages hitting every other industry. But the real killer right now is transportation costs. Salt is extremely heavy, and shipping costs have literally tripled in some areas over the last 2 years. A 50-pound bag of agricultural salt that cost $8 just 2 years ago is now hitting $25 in many markets. But here's the kicker that makes it worth every penny. That same bag can be used to preserve hundreds of pounds of meat and vegetables when refrigeration isn't available due to a grid failure. I learned this traditional preservation technique from an old-timer in Montana who lived through economic crises in the 70s. He showed me how to cure fresh meat using nothing but coarse sea salt and basic herbs. The meat lasted for 8 months hanging in his root cellar without any refrigeration and tasted better than most store-bought jerky. This isn't just survival knowledge, it is money-saving wisdom that can stretch your food budget by 300% during tough times. But storage is where most people mess up completely with salt. Moisture is salt's only enemy, turning it into a solid, unusable brick. But if you store it right, it becomes an eternal resource. I use food-grade buckets with Gamma Seal lids, and here's the secret. Throw in a handful of food-grade silica gel packets. These absorb any ambient moisture that gets in when you open the bucket and keep your salt flowing freely even after years of storage. This small investment pays for itself because properly stored salt maintains its purity and effectiveness indefinitely. Here's something else that shocked me during my research. Different types of salt have completely different survival applications. Fine sea salt is perfect for general cooking and basic food preservation. Coarse salt works best for drawing moisture out to cure meats and making heavy brine solutions for pickling. Pink Himalayan salt is unique because it contains trace minerals like magnesium and potassium that become absolutely critical for health when your diet becomes severely limited during emergencies. I keep all 3 types stored separately because each serves a unique and vital purpose when fresh food becomes scarce. Item number 7 is apple cider vinegar. Let me share something that literally saved my neighbor's life last winter, and she still does not realize it was the simple apple cider vinegar that did the trick. Janet is a sweet lady in her 70s who lives next door to me, and she came down with a nasty respiratory infection right when the local clinic was completely overwhelmed with peak flu season cases. She could not get a doctor's appointment for 2 weeks. I brought her over a bottle of raw organic apple cider vinegar mixed with some raw honey and told her to take a tablespoon twice daily. 3 days later, she was back on her feet and feeling like her normal self. The doctor later told her that whatever she had done at home had likely prevented the infection from developing into severe pneumonia. That is when I realized that apple cider vinegar is not just a salad dressing or a mild health supplement. It is a legitimate, powerful medical tool. Here's what blew my mind when I started researching this stuff deeply. Raw apple cider vinegar that still contains the mother, which is that cloudy sediment at the bottom, contains over 50 different beneficial probiotic strains and produces potent natural antibiotic compounds. But the really crazy part is that it literally cannot go bad. The high acetic acid content creates an environment that is so hostile to bacteria and mold that spoilage is practically impossible. I found documented cases of 30-year-old apple cider vinegar that was tested and found to be still potent and effective. We are talking about powerful medicine that never expires and costs less than $3 per month for a family of 4 to use daily. But here's where the supply chain situation gets concerning for
I spoke with a commercial apple processor in Michigan last month, and he painted a scary picture for the industry. Apple harvests across the country have been devastated by climate extremes, including late frosts, severe drought in some areas, and unprecedented weather swings. The specific heritage apple varieties used to make high-quality apple cider vinegar are particularly vulnerable to these changes. He is seeing 35% lower yields compared to just 5 years ago, and his production costs are climbing fast. A gallon of quality raw apple cider vinegar that cost $15 last year is now pushing $25, and availability is getting spotty in wholesale markets. The medicinal applications in a grid-down scenario are absolutely incredible. Raw apple cider vinegar helps regulate blood sugar levels, which becomes crucial when your diet changes abruptly during food shortages to rely more on simple carbs. It aids significantly in digestion when you are forced to eat unfamiliar preserved foods that might upset your stomach. It boosts overall immune function when stress levels are high. I learned a lot of this from a homesteader in rural Oregon who has used apple cider vinegar as a primary tool to keep her family healthy for 20 years without relying on modern health insurance. She makes a potent concoction called fire cider, which is apple cider vinegar infused with raw honey, garlic, ginger, horseradish, and hot peppers. 1 tablespoon of that daily, and her family rarely gets sick, even during the worst flu seasons. But here is the secret regarding storage that most people miss. The storage method determines its long-term potency. You need raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar with the mother intact, and it absolutely must be stored in glass bottles. Plastic containers can leach chemicals over time due to the acidity and reduce its effectiveness. Dark amber glass is ideal because it protects the contents from light degradation. I keep my main supply hidden in a cool, dark pantry where temperatures stay relatively consistent. The mother sediment might settle to the bottom or create weird-looking new formations over time, but that is actually a sign of a healthy, living product. Here is my personal strategy that might save you hundreds of dollars over time. I buy high-quality raw apple cider vinegar in gallon glass containers from local producers whenever possible and transfer it to smaller amber glass bottles for daily kitchen use. This protects the bulk supply from repeated exposure to air and light while keeping a working supply easily accessible. The savings are massive. Buying in bulk reduces the cost per ounce by about 60% compared to buying those tiny little bottles at the health food store. Plus, I know it is authentic because I'm dealing directly with producers who have often been making it for generations. Look, I'm not trying to scare you with all of this information, but I am trying to prepare you for reality. The crisis projected for 2026 is not some distant theoretical possibility. The early stages are already starting right now. Food prices are climbing relentlessly, supply chains are visibly breaking down, and most people still have absolutely no idea what is coming down the pike. These 7 foods I have shared are not just survival items for a doomsday scenario. They are smart, tangible investments in your family's future stability and health. While your neighbors are eventually fighting over whatever meager scraps are left on the supermarket shelves, you will be sitting pretty with a pantry full of incredibly valuable foods that essentially never expire and get more valuable in real terms every single day that passes. Here is your immediate action plan based on this information. Do not try to do everything at once. Start with just 1 or 2 items from this list that make the most sense for you right now. Don't go crazy and max out your credit cards. Don't try to buy everything in one giant haul. Build your stockpile gradually, smartly, and consistently over time. Focus intently on proper storage methods because the best survival food in the world is totally worthless if it spoils due to poor handling. If this information opened your eyes to the reality of the situation like it did mine, please take a moment to engage with this content so more people can see it. Drop a comment below telling me exactly which of these 7 foods you are planning to prioritize first and why. I read every single comment and often reply with additional tips and insights based on your questions. Remember, the absolute best time to prepare was yesterday. The second best time is right now. Do not wait until the full force of the crisis hits and everyone else suddenly realizes what you already know today.